Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Innovation to Impact. I'm here with my good buddies, Shepon and Nick. We're here to talk a little bit about our end of 2025 newsletter. So I'll go ahead and just launch into some of the things that I talked about as we compared notes about what to write in our respective contributions to the newsletter. We settled on ultimately trying to take a more forward-looking kind of an approach, which is kind of a reasonable thing to do at the end of the year. And so for me personally, I often feel like I whine a lot about things that disappoint me and things about, our ability to fully leverage the power of technologies, our lack of focus on things that I think are most important, in particular drug development, attrition, and the translation kinds of issues. And so I personally welcome the opportunity to talk about the things that I was most excited about. And so the things I focused on, that I talked about, that are energizing me, are things like the reproducibility crisis. I love the idea that we're thinking more about the animal studies that we do and what we're trying to do with them, and making sure that we're doing studies that are most impactful in drug development. I like the idea of being able to talk about biology. The biology is something that underpins all of the modeling that we do, the decisions we're trying to make, and ultimately is the bridge between us, all the technical stuff we do, and success and the opportunity to impact patients. So the more we have the opportunity to focus on the fundamental biology, the more that I like to do that. Some of the novel modeling kinds of capabilities with complex in vitro models, I think, is really, really exciting, even though I'm not a believer that we can completely move away from animal studies just yet. I really like the idea that we've got modeling capabilities that get closer to that in vivo kind of complex that allow us to start to complement what we do in our animal studies. AI, which is something that Nick talked a lot about, and actually in a much broader context and much deeper, because he knows a whole lot more about that than I do, is something that I'm excited about in being able to leverage our collective experience and the full complement of knowledge that is available to us to enable us to make decisions, again, to decrease our dependence on animals. And then lastly, I talked a little bit about digital measures. I'm really excited. We all recognize them as being wearables when it comes to us as individuals, and the kinds of things that we can wear that help us to monitor things like heart rate and activity levels and blood oxygen levels, and all of an increasing portfolio of things that we can measure. And we're starting to do that now in our animal studies. I think digital measures are going to allow us to have a completely different understanding of the distinction between health and disease, and allow us to do the kinds of things that Nick talks a lot about, which is to be more preventive in the way that we deal with health and disease. And so I'm really, really excited about the opportunity that digital measures bring.
I'll hop in, Brian, because my favorite thing you said was, probably more biology, right? So what is it? Especially, we talk about AI and biology that makes us think we're going to have, more powerful capabilities for doing biology and for understanding it. And so I think, what some of the things I wrote about, what are some of these themes? Why are we so excited about it? I think, one of the things AI is good at is multimodal approaches. And you can see there's like 25 plus different foundation models out there for different biomedical data sets, and a lot of the purpose of these is to extract embeddings and be able to kind of bring these together to solve different problems, to get more of a holistic approach. Whether it's multi or a single data type, we have mountains of past data from every which way, right? So can we start better leveraging that? Beyond past data is past knowledge. And so that's what, like, all of this mountain of, PubMed in all of our scientific journals, or even publications within a company, or, people that know stuff within the company, how can we get directed to, how can we, AI, whether it's just spitting out text or ideally, interacting with some sort of knowledge repository, how can we better take, have more of our collective past knowledge exposed to us in the right sort of way. And, AI can read many more journals than we can. It just can't read one as well as we can, right? It can structure and bring together all kinds of modalities in different databases. And so, how can we start leveraging what AI is good at to fill in some of the gaps and limitations we have as people, right? And I think in the future we'll talk a little bit more about what it means to be is it going to mean to be a scientist or a healthcare professional in that age. But I think for the foreseeable future, the quality and quantity of our ideas is going to remain critically important, and we might have a little bit better throughput for acting and testing those ideas, and a bit de-risk the fact that we might miss something critical because we weren't able to read enough papers or talk to enough people. And from that point of view, you talked about, preventing missing things, right? Well, there's this other topic of closing the loop. And so, it's not always past knowledge, but you talked about these in vitro systems, building new platforms for say data generation, whether you're in preclinical safety or it's something on your wrist or your head, right? Having, designing things fit for purpose to help make better decisions, or kind of to be less reliant on what we already know might be suboptimal. Animal studies we talk about a lot, right? And so how, the goal is to make better decisions, but there's plenty of people out there that also for ethical and, a whole bunch of operational reasons would like to be less reliant. So, how can you start designing these systems for data generation? And when I say closed loop, whether it's animals, say Fitbits and devices, or just APIs for generating data points, testing, properties of a protein or small molecule, the ability to go from prediction to observation faster, will be of great benefit for speeding up innovation. And in the process, you're also gathering data in a systematic way that will increase your kind of knowledge base and predictive power in the beginning. And I think that's also where, we hit preventative health. And you can think, if we think of what is healthcare, a lot of us picture going to the doctor, but how often do we actually go to the doctor? What does that experience look like? And there's a whole lot of time that happens in between doctor's visits. So, even just right there, you're defining a problem like, oh, well, could we be better aware of what's happening, between doctor visits? And then if you think about your entire span of your life for doctor visits, there's things that are going to go wrong with you at certain points of life. And so if you're looking at it this way, it might be a whole lot easier to do screening and early detection. Once these become more commonplace in the population, get you to that doctor sooner, or just help you to change your life a little bit to reverse course, right? So these are, and AI is great for behavior modification. We've seen the whole rest of the planet leverage this to change our behavior in a whole bunch of ways, some of which are less beneficial to our mental health and well-being. And so, I think those of us in the field are now interested to use the same power to modify, behavior to kind of do some good on top of that. So, I think it's, you focused a little bit on, the problems and what you're going to solving. I like to, think a little bit down the road in terms of the opportunity to bring the data and transform it with AI into some value. And, I think the process of doing that, I know Stefan has a lot to, in terms of implementing and operationalizing that as well. And so I'll stop talking for a moment because I'm sure you'd like to chime in, Stefan. But
one thing, I'm sorry to break in, Stefan, but one of the things that you mentioned, Nick, that I think Stefan is going to take much further, and that is all about the decision making. Mm-hmm. In our last newsletter, we explored sort of the economics of drug development and ROI and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it's all about making decisions. Now, our organizations want to make decisions that often make money, but you got to make a decision. And so, the ability to enable decision making, I think, is something that we don't appreciate well enough. And I know that's a particular passion of Stepan, so I'm eager to hear his thoughts on that.
No, thanks, Brian. And so like Nick, you were talking about, the visits between the physicians, right? So I'm obsessed with the wearables, right? So like even currently I have 5 wearables on, measures my blood glucose, my sleep cycle, my blood pressure, like all those different things, right? And so I have all of this data, but then what do I do with the data, right? So how do I make decisions with it, right? So you mentioned, having good decisions, right? Actionable decisions. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us, right? And so what I kind of bring up is, right, that, it's having warranty on those decisions, right? And I think that in 2026, it's the teams, not with the fanciest stack, right? Or the fanciest AI tool, which a lot of times that's what we chase for, right? Because that's what we can get, support for and funding for. But it's going to be the teams that are willing to offer the warranty on the decisions that the stack, right, or the technology, whatever it is used to make. And I think that's also for the technology companies as well, right? If they can provide us with a warranty on a decision that's going to come out of their technology, that hey, it's going to help us to make the decision, right? And so it's really a minimum evidence chain that makes the output actionable for us, right? That's the warranty I want to have on these technologies. And also this allows us, right, when the warranty breaks, right? So if we notice that organoids, right, or microphysiological system are supposed to provide this reproducibility, but they're not between the labs, right? So we should recognize that and then say, we got to reassess this because we can't make a decision on this. So to me, is really giving a lot more thought to that. And also when you actually put that warranty on those decisions, you need to identify who's accountable for. And I think that's one of the aspects that we skirt around a lot about, because when we bring something novel into the company, the risk is pretty significant, right? But if it doesn't work, again, we talked about that in our previous video cast, right? That the incentives are not aligned when it's seen something that you bring in and it fails, right? We don't see it here, right? We don't see it as a failure. You should learn from it, right? You tested something, so now you can make your decisions on how to interact or engage with this technology or not. But I think that's one of the aspects that we have to identify who's accountable for those decisions that come and on the data that comes out of these technologies. And then so having that type of warranty on those decisions allow us to have those aspects, and also then allows us to engage with those technologies in a kind of straighter, easier way, or not, right? So that's the big part that I think we really need to start doing, and currently it's missing very often.
So maybe I'll double down on that, Shipman, and I think next month I'd like to again talk a little bit more, like what does it look like for all of us in our day jobs, etc. But one common theme, I think, especially in this wave of innovation, is going to be human in the loop for almost all of it, and about augmenting people. And so, like, I like your idea about the warranty, but ultimately, the accountability is probably going to sit with the person leveraging the technology to do their day job better. And so, the warrant. So, what do we need to demand from AI output to enable us to feel more confident, and that we're not taking a risk by incorporating that output into our decision making, or helping use it to accelerate our throughput and these types of things. And so transparency and explicability is definitely one of those. Ability to trace back to root of information or source of information, reproducibility and quality control of data, of data generation, and how it's put it together. So I'm not sure. And maybe the question is, do you have thoughts a little bit on what you need to expect from, the AI and the provider? What, do we as individuals, or perhaps like the culture of the organization, need to provide to enable us to be in a better position to kind of de-risk adopting AI without, coming to wrong conclusions, or having it be counterproductive, right? And then how much time is whatever sort of validating and I guess that's it too, right? Like, well, it can speed things up, but then if it takes so much time to kind of proofread, double check, validate whatever type of output that is, then that eats into the savings a bit. But I'll pause there just because I think it's an interesting thought, this warranty. And so how are you separating the person from the provider, and
Yeah. So thanks, Nick. Right. So I'll start with one example of the microphysiological systems, right, and then I'll step into the AI aspect. So with the microphysiological systems, right, a lot of the platforms provide us with a lot of different endpoints and biomarkers, right? And most of them we can't really make decisions on, right? Especially when you look at the regulatory aspect, right? So now I've been part of various microphysiological systems that have been accepted by FDA for the ISTAT program, right, for the qualification of those technologies. And it's very clear, right, that there is a lot of those endpoints that those systems provide, but we can't make decisions on them, right? So, but we have to identify which ones we can't use when they come out. But the way it's set up, right, the more endpoints and biomarkers that those technologies can provide, right, it seems like they are actually better for us. But we're learning, at least from my perspective, that we're not. It makes it more chaotic because you can't make those decisions. So it's a similar also when you step into AI, right? I look at AI in two aspects. One, you have this administrative AI, right, which helps us extract information from manuscripts, help us find patterns in data, and etc. Right? It's, to me, that's explainable AI. We know how it works, right, and what can we expect from it. So I think that's one big part, right, that for us. Knowing, again, having the warranty, we have to identify what do we expect the outcome of using that AI. And again, with administrative AI, it's a lot easier to do that. I think where a lot of companies go after, it's this kind of exciting AI, the predictive AI, right? And that's very different, right? What's the accuracy there, right? For the administrative AI, we pretty much know what the accuracy is. We can double check it and etc., right? But like you said, extracting certain insight from a manuscript, if you prompt it correctly, it does it extremely well. But the predictive side is not, right? And that's where we're missing the accountability and what those systems provide that we can actually trust and make our decisions on. And I think that technology providers provide us with a lot of hype about it, and they do not give us the warranty on the data that comes out of it and the decisions that we can make with it. They almost like step back and say, hey, this is what we provided you. We believe it's really accurate, but you make that decision on it, right? Versus the other way around. They should provide a warranty on what the outcome will help us make. So I think that's where you end up having that accountability, one from the side of the technology provider, but then also, and if it's in-house developed, it's the same thing, right? Who's developing it? They have to provide that warranty. But then the person responsible for it, right, accountable, is within the company. And then so that's where, again, I think that if you're starting of using AI, instead of jumping into this predictive AI, which is, the potential is enormous, but it's really risky, just starting off with administrative AI, and where it's easier to identify who's accountable and how you make decisions on it, and practice on that, and then think about the other level of AI. I hope, that maybe that makes sense what I'm saying, because it makes sense in my head, but I'm not sure if it makes sense when it comes out.
Yeah, it makes sense. I do think, so you're right, in that's what I was prodding you, but you have to think about, what type of prediction is being, whether it's administrative or true predictive, right? What is the output? How critical is that decision? How much influence is that on their decision? And how I'm not sure. So you have to start thinking under the hood. The point I wanted to make was, I think the line between what you call administrative and predictive might start to get a bit blurred if you think about like an interface to help, look at past trials or regulatory responses and help you design your clinical trial. It's helping you with the document. It might be like highlighting some things that are but it's also, these systems will be going down into, let's say, actual patient cohorts or EHR systems or databases. So, a little bit of what might look like administrative, but starting to bring more and more different modalities to it and blur this line. And so then to me, it seems like it could be an extra layer of complexity on, providing full transparency and understanding, what you're sitting on. And the other, what is this? I always forget it, Bernoulli's law or whatever, it takes 10 times longer to kind of de-risk BS than it is to create it, right? And so I think we also have to be careful when we're using AI not to use it improperly and kind of let it like lay out some sort of argument or perspective first, and then just try to kind of fine tune that, but kind of use it to help you fill in the holes and produce things faster, right? So, and maybe that's again a good future topic. But then that was a little bit back to organizational culture, right? So you have like what do we demand from the solution? How are we using it as individuals? And then as a culture, like what can we do to kind of provide sort of guidelines, education, especially for people. And one of the biggest impacts I think AI will have is democratizing data a little bit. So kind of enabling people who aren't necessarily with quantitative backgrounds or coders to be able to more efficiently interrogate data, right? And so they might have less of a background for the mindset of doing this, which is great. But then, again, if you have less experience how to de-risk, some of the pitfalls that go along with this, that people that are more used to that are kind of well aware of. Right?
And so Nick, that kind of makes me think about, you're right, it's democratizing the data, right, and how you work with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also makes me think about, when we talk about AI, right, and AI companies say, it's democratizing access to knowledge, right, which is actually the opposite, because it's not. Because if you work with AI, right, like ChatGPT that's free, ChatGPT that's $20, and ChatGPT that's $200 per month, right?
Yeah.
The hallucinations, there's a huge difference between how the free AI hallucinates versus the $200 one, right? So to me, you're not democratizing access to knowledge, right? You are actually even democratizing it. And it's the same thing for a lot of companies. They'll start off with the lower level of, because subscription is cheaper to kind of try this beta tested, right? And then when folks use it, they find out that it doesn't work, it hallucinates and etc. Right? So then actually they step away. But if you use it at the higher level, right, which gives you less hallucinations and actually more accuracy, it's a different aspect. But if you have folks in organizations that are using two different levels of that subscription, and that's very often happens, the higher levels are typically beta tested with the smaller group, and then you have access to like, a co-pilot for everything, right? And then so then there is a huge difference between actually democratizing the data access and data work, but it's actually making it worse, right? So I think that's something that you have to think about as an organization when you are using it and engaging with. If you truly want to kind of democratize the data, the knowledge access, you got to step up and use the best models. But that's challenging, right? Because that is really huge investment as well. So, how do you balance that, those aspects?
What there's a key theme in what you all have been sharing, and I've been nicely sitting here listening and learning from the two of you, and that is that despite the fact that the incredible opportunity of AI is to go beyond the limitations of us as mere mortals, right? We produced far more data and information than we'll ever leverage because of our human limitations. But on the flip side, you can't take the human out of the equation for all the reasons that you guys have just discussed. And as I'm looking at AI and how it's being applied, that's the area where I think we've got some gaps. I don't think we're thinking enough about the things that ultimately have to go into how we're using AI and the decisions that we're trying to make. As an example, and this doesn't apply just to AI, I think it's more broadly applicable across a lot of these modeling systems. Unfortunately, our historical use of animal studies has allowed us to be intellectually lazy. We assumed that all the right pieces and all the right functions and all the right biology was in that animal. And I don't think that's unreasonable. And so we could just basically describe things that happen and they would have relevance to people. And we found out that maybe it's just not that simple. So yesterday, as we're thinking about more reductionist or even more black box kinds of opportunities like AI, we have to think more critically about the sort of biology and the connections and the integration of the things that go into those systems. So yesterday, I was sitting through thinking about all the questions that are inherently embedded in a 28-day repeat dose GLP general toxicity study, which is commonly used to support an IND, right? And so on the one hand, you're kind of like, well, okay, I'm going to derive an NOAEL. I'll get a maximum tolerated dose. I'll identify target organ toxicities. I'll know at what doses those occur. And I'm going to use that to design my clinical trial. So, okay, that sounds pretty simple, right? But the reality of it is, as a pathologist, I look at over 40 tissues. And as I'm thinking through each and every tissue that I look like, there's an innumerable number of questions that go into that, right? That is just absolutely not captured because that's just the way we've done it. Well, if you're not going to be looking at histologic sections of 40-some tissues out of a 28-day rat or dog or monkey study, and you're going to do that in a completely different way, you need to have a fundamental understanding of all those questions that have been rattling around in my head that nobody wanted to hear because all they wanted was whatever descriptor I was going to put and to tell them whether it was reversible, adverse, and how they were going to monitor it. None of that stuff is part of our discussion today. This is what I mean when I talk about being energized and excited at the opportunity to talk about biology. It's that biology that ultimately is the foundation for all these kinds of things that we're trying to do with that. And we're not having those kinds of discussions at near the level that we need to, from my perspective.
No, I mean, I fully agree, Brian, right? And so it's even when we talk about, the validation and qualification of the MPS technologies, right? So again, we're looking at all of the different things they can output, right? But we're not necessarily aligning them with the questions the regulators are asking.
We're looking at their process context of use, not their biological context of use.
Fully agree. And that's what needs to change, right? Because if we don't, right, we're going to be developing these tools for another decade, right? And we're going to have the same conversation 10 years later that we're having now. If we're going to,
I'll be too old to be sitting here talking to you too.
You're going to be doing that from your boat fishing, but
or a wheelchair.
Yeah. But anyway, but this might be maybe with last minute or so. Any last thoughts, Nick? Maybe we can start off with you.
I'll just start. MPS, you mean microphysiological systems, correct? Or
yes,
just
sir.
for the audience here. Mirandolini's law was the one. I was close, but not quite. And the last thing is, when you're talking about, yes, I mean, even the models, the state of the art versus the earlier versions have, very different output. And then if you're using both, you might assign the amount of confidence you have in one to the other, et cetera. But it's not just the models, it's also what tools you're using to access them and query them, or what other types of resources they might be hooked up to or have access to. So, and maybe that's a good one to get into in the future. So I'll leave it with that, right?
I think a key output from this is that there is a lot to be excited about. There's an incredible amount of opportunity to do what we do so much better. But we have got a tendency as a species to think, oh, well, my life's going to get a whole lot easier because I got all this technology and it's going to do the work for me. And the reality of it is that's just not true. We actually have to work harder in the interim to make sure that those technologies are positioned to do exactly what it is that we need to do with them. And that's going to take a whole lot more intellectual horsepower than I think we're putting into these things right this minute. And that's the kind of stuff that energizes me, because I like thinking about that kind of stuff. But for this technology to be useful for us, we've got to do our due diligence. We've got to put our effort into it. We need to think about exactly how we're going to use it and what we're going to get from it.
Right. Awesome. Yeah. So I think those are great points to end on our video cast for today. And again, looking forward to seeing everybody and for you guys to listen to us, hopefully, and get something out of it in our next episode. Cheers.
All right. Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.